Close your eyes and try to imagine yourself on display. Closed inside a cage as if you are a rare animal species. You and your entire family are on display with strangers poking, laughing, and staring as if you're merely an exhibit. How does that make you feel? Humiliated, right? Well, this was the reality for many in what were known as human zoos or freak shows. Those human zoos were used to display people from different cultures, caged like animals for the amusement of others. Let's find out the dark origins of human zoos to understand why Black people were so often the victims of this cruel practice. Along the way, I'll also shed light on the profound impact they had on the individuals and the communities who were subjected to this exploitation. Zoos are often portrayed as institutions for conservation, education, and public enjoyment, but the reality is far more complex. Behind the bars of these zoos reflected a sinister reality that reinforced the racist ideologies and inflicted long-lasting damage. How did human zoos start from racist ideas and end up just serving those same ideologies? While Europe dove headfirst into the Second Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, reaping the benefits of inventions like the train, telephone, and the light bulb, a troubling trend emerged alongside, a misguided attempt to justify racist and distorted views of evolution. Picture this. Across various European cities, exhibitions resembling zoos showcased African and Southeast Asian individuals as if they were mere specimens of the animal kingdom. By this time, most of us know about Sara Baartman, all thanks to a 2010 film based on her story. Imagine Sara, labeled as the Hottentot Venus, displayed across Europe not as a human being, but as an attraction. Imagine how she must have felt standing there, stripped of her dignity. Sara was exhibited as a freak show attraction in Europe under the name Hottentot Venus. Because of her unconventional body shape, she was brought from South Africa to be exhibited as a specimen. Such freak shows became really popular across Europe and North America before turning into full-fledged human zoos. This wasn't merely a niche phenomenon. These human zoos garnered disturbing recognition, drawing crowds eager to witness humans confined alongside monkeys and apes. The non-white cultures were cruelly ridiculed. They propagated the notion of white racial superiority, perpetuating harmful stereotypes and reinforcing colonial power dynamics. Think of it. Indigenous peoples from Africa and Southeast Asia were plucked from their homelands and paraded before curious Western audiences, deprived of their autonomy and reduced to objects of curiosity. We have covered the idea of human zoos in our video about photos of slavery. For those who have watched that episode, you've already caught a glimpse of one egregious example of human zoos. The next instance of human zoos that depicts these horrors vividly took place in the Congo Free State. The story of this state is replete with tragedies. Its trouble began when Belgian King Leopold II established the Congo Free State in 1885 by brutally seizing the African landmass. He declared the state as his personal possession rather than controlling it like any other colony. He privately owned the region. While the act itself was appalling, Leopold's reign became infamous for its brutality. The people of Congo were forced into labor for valued resources to enrich the king. Envision the heartache and despair as the people of Congo were torn from their homes, compelled into grueling labor, all to fill the pockets of a distant king. But that's not the worst part. Those who lived had to participate in exhibitions as specimens with a status not very different from the animals. The king approved the human zoo of Tervuren in 1897. It was started as a temporary exhibition by the Royal Museum of Central Africa. The zoo was a mock African village established in Tervuren, the king's country estates, woods, and ponds. Initially, 144 Congolese were transported to Europe for exhibition. After that, the king, who had never set foot in the Congo, imported 267 Congolese men, women, and children in 1897 to the estate for display behind a fence. 1.3 million people would come, point, and gawk at them. American author Adam Hochschild wrote in his book King Leopold's Ghost that some spectators tossed edibles, mostly candies, at them. The Congolese started getting sick because of eating so many candies. The king put up a sign saying, "The blacks are fed by the organizing committee." Pay attention to the similarity of the sign, "Don't feed the animals," at an ordinary zoo. 3 villages were built in total, housing the Congolese to be a show for the Belgian people. 90 soldiers of the Force Publique, an exceptionally brutal army, were placed to guard the villages and perform in parades. A 4th village was built as a comparison to the other 3 primitive villages to showcase that the Congolese could be civilized. The purpose was to show off the work of civilization among the supposedly primitive Congolese population. It was to encourage the Belgian people to invest in the colony and get impressed by the king's work. A personal file kept by Alexis Moles, the king's close aide and confidant, who was a bookkeeper for the 1894 fair, showed that 2 men, Sabo and Bitio, died soon after arrival in Belgium in 1894. They couldn't survive the horrific conditions on the boat they were transported in. Over the coming weeks, 5 more died from diseases ranging from bronchitis to pneumonia, measles, and heart disease. They were named relatively recently for the first time in a Belgian museum exhibition. The names were Isakoe, who was 31 years old, Mangois, 18 years old, Manguing, 18 years old, Binda, 25 years old, Mangwanda, 17 years old, and Pezo, who was 18 years old. 7 Congolese died of influenza and pneumonia in the zoo. They were buried in Tervuren. These unfortunate men were treated with contempt on their deaths, just as in life. Their bodies were dumped into an unmarked grave. To remember this tragedy and to acknowledge the dark past, Belgium organized the exhibition 100 by Congo, a century of Congolese art in Antwerp, which focused, among other things, on the Antwerp World Fair of 1894. While the 1894 World Fair remains a dark chapter in the history of humanity, unfortunately, it's not the only one of its kind. This exhibition was a visual testament to the supposed benefits of the European presence in Africa. Human zoos, pioneered by individuals like Carl Hagenbeck, became powerful tools in propagating this ideology. In the 1870s, Hagenbeck orchestrated exhibits featuring African animals alongside Nubian individuals, later expanding to include Inuit, Somalis, and indigenous peoples from various regions, while captivating Western audiences, often subjected participants to poor living conditions and illnesses like smallpox, highlighting the exploitative nature of these displays. But this was not merely about showcasing material wealth. It was about reinforcing the ideology of the white man's burden, the belief that Europeans had a moral obligation to civilize and uplift supposedly inferior races. Scientific racism, championed by figures like Carl Hagenbeck, provided the pseudo-scientific justification for these colonial endeavors, perpetuating harmful stereotypes and justifying the subjugation of indigenous peoples. In the midst of this spectacle, one cannot overlook the suffering endured by those on display. Yet, in the eyes of the Belgian public, they were little more than curiosities, exotic novelties to be observed and marveled at. As we reflect on this dark chapter in history, let us remember the individuals whose lives were shattered by the greed and the hubris of colonial powers. Were human zoos a derogatory display or a self-serving tool to reinforce scientific racism? Over time, the concept of human zoos continued to grow, gaining traction notably through various world fairs. Among these, the 1904 St. Louis World Fair, held in the U.S., stands out as particularly infamous for its human exhibits. The World Fair included an anthropological display showcasing different evolutionary stages of mankind. It doesn't sound that bad, given what we've delved into earlier, right? But the issue with the exhibit was that it was intended to fill the prophecy of white prophecy. It portrayed Africans as the lowest, Asians in the middle, with white people standing at the pinnacle of human evolution. This notion suggested that these lower races were closer to animals than the evolved status of white individuals. This entire episode is an epitome of the lengths academia and administration at the time would go to endorse hypotheses propounded by scientific racism. William John McGee, head of the Bureau of American Ethnology, was commissioned for the anthropological display at the fair. It was his idea to showcase the evolutionary stages through a racial-cultural lens. He arranged for the native peoples to be displayed in villages that recreated their native habitats, enclosed by fences. These villages were truly a picture of human zoos. Over 4 million spectators visited these anthropological displays, gawking and poking at the native people. Adding to the humiliation, the natives were forced to participate in a series of athletic contests that were designed to prove that they were biologically inferior to white individuals. These natives were also subjected to experiments in a special laboratory established by the fair's anthropology department. According to the book, Anthropology Goes to the Fair, the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the lab conducted tests on the native people to measure their intelligence, physical features, and their threshold for pain. Indigenous people were brought in from the far corners of the world. From Japan came representatives of the Ainu people. Patagonians came from South America. Igoros and Negritos came from the Philippines. The latter two were considered to be near the bottom of the evolutionary ladder. The Negritos were dubbed as the missing link between humans and apes. If you think that's awful, brace yourself for what's coming next. The group that was below even the Negritos were the Pygmies from the African Congo. These were believed to be the most exotic people group. McGee held a particularly derogatory view of one group, the Pygmies of the Congo, whom he considered the lowest in human evolution. Ironically, they became the stars of the exhibit, even earning money from visitors who purchased hats and cigars from the vendors at the fair. This undermined the false narrative that Pygmies could not appreciate modern luxuries and preferred a primitive lifestyle. The fair's broader goal was not only to demonstrate Western culture's superiority, but also to tout its conquest. McGee himself declared that the aim of his work would be to present human progress from the dark prime to the highest enlightenment, from savagery to civic organization, from egoism to altruism. As mentioned earlier, the natives were pressured to participate in athletic displays as well. McGee was approached by James E. Sullivan for collaboration. Being a white supremacist and head of the fair's Department of Physical Culture, McGee's idea of a human zoo interested him immensely. He said that it would be the perfect opportunity to collect athletic data to confirm the European athletic prowess was unparalleled to other cultures. The events, dubbed as Special Olympics, was held without any prior intimation to the participants, as well as rigorous physical training undertaken by the white athletes. Neither did the indigenous people receive a properly translated rules guideline. So what's the story of Ota Benga, a Congolese native who ended his life? In the World Fair of 1904, one pygmy, Ota Benga, gained celebrity status following his appearance at the fair. His story serves as a tragic example of the impact of human zoos. Benga was purchased by explorer Samuel P. Werner, acting on behalf of McGee, from slavers for the price of salt and copper wire. Samuel Werner was a white man from South Carolina who moved to the Belgian Congo, working as a Presbyterian missionary. However, it turned out that he had a flair for acquiring human beings rather than saving their souls. He received a commission to bring 12 people from the Congo to St. Louis. It wasn't considered trafficking back then. The text commissioning him to acquire the men stated, "Dear Mr. Werner, you are to secure the voluntary attendance of the exposition of 12 pygmies by May 1st, 1904. Delays by shipwreck or other catastrophe accepted. Yours with respect, W.J. McGee, Department of Anthropology, St. Louis Exposition." Notably, the use of the word voluntary here is complicated. It was definitely so for a young man Werner secured, Ota Benga, the one we mentioned earlier. Benga's story is replete with tragedy, horror, and apathy. Before coming to the fair, Benga had narrowly escaped death by Belgian militia only to be captured by African traders. Werner bought him and guised it as an attempt to save him from cannibals. He used this to lure in other pygmies as well. However, after reaching the US, Benga was unjustly depicted as a cannibal due to his pointed teeth, which were actually a cultural adornment, not intended for eating people. Many newspapers depicted him as a cannibal pygmy hailing from the darkest forest of Africa, and the litany of abominations still doesn't end. After the expo, Werner brought the participants in the exhibition back to then Belgian Congo. The other men belonged to the Batwa tribe, while Benga was Mbuti. Benga's tribe had been wiped out by genocide. Unable to find home anywhere, he returned with Werner to the US cash-strapped. Werner arranged for him to live in a spare room in the American Museum of Natural History. The museum didn't agree with him, as he flung a chair at the head of Florence Guggenheim, a philanthropist, at a gathering of wealthy donors. The museum then arranged to transfer him to an even more outrageous abode, the Bronx Zoo. The zoo exhibited him in the chimpanzee cage and then a larger cage with an orangutan. It proved to be lucrative for the zoo, as he was a popular display. People swarmed to view the missing link, which drew huge crowds. However, it wasn't appreciated by some people who did have a conscience grounded in integrity and humanity. A 1906 letter in zoo archives discussed silencing the outrage by saying that Benga was a zoo employee. It eased the white minds, but editors of African-American newspapers expressed their ire with bold headlines. On behalf of a coalition of black churches, Robert Stewart MacArthur petitioned New York's mayor to have Benga released from the zoo. Reverend James Gordon, superintendent of the Howard Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn, said, "Our race, we think, is depressed enough without exhibiting one of us with the apes. We think we are worthy of being considered human beings with souls." However, such protests didn't resonate with those in power. Meanwhile, Benga was becoming unmanageable, according to the zoo director, who resented his powerlessness to punish him because of public scrutiny. Ultimately, Benga was released from his so-called employment and sent to Gordon's orphanage. He underwent physical alterations, his teeth capped, probably to hide his identity that proved to be a liability for too long. After 4 years, Benga went to live at the Lynchburg Theological Seminary and College for black students in Virginia. Relatively skilled and aware, with a changed name, Ota Benga, he found work at a tobacco factory, but he still couldn't find a home there. He tried to return to his hometown. Even without his people, he would surely belong there more than here. But voyages had all been canceled because of the outbreak of World War I. It proved to be the last straw for him. With sunken spirits, he threw his American clothes on a bonfire, symbolically removed the caps from his teeth, and silenced his torment in 1916 by ending his life on his own terms, something this world denied him for his whole life. According to Werner's grandson, Phillips Werner Bradford, he said that he wanted to send his soul back to Africa. Even his death couldn't shake the conscience of many. The New York Times dismissed tales of Benga's exhibition as an urban legend. However, their own archives contain stories about his exhibition in the monkey cage. A reporter wrote in 1906, over and over again, the crowd laughed at him. If he wonders why, he does not show it. In 2020, 4 years ago, the Wildlife Conservation Society, which runs the Bronx Zoo, finally apologized for the exhibition. The zoo's curator said in 1974 that whatever it was all done with the best of intentions. Ota Benga was interesting to the New York public, and this is a scathing indication regarding whose intentions mattered at that time. Despite the commercial success of these exhibits, they came at a profound cost to those involved. Ota Benga's story serves as a poignant reminder of the human toll of these exploitative practices. Sold into captivity for meager goods, Benga endured unimaginable loss and suffering, only to be further dehumanized and exploited in the name of entertainment. With the rise of moving pictures and alternative forms of entertainment, there was a less demand for the degrading spectacle of human exhibits. Following the horrors of World War II, human zoos all but disappeared as the grim reality of extreme scientific racism became widely recognized as repugnant. The crimes of the Third Reich were seen as a culmination of the path paved by scientific racism. The evolving landscape couldn't stop another human zoo from happening. In 1958, over 60 years after the advent of Tervuren Human Zoo, another Belgian human zoo was established. This was a 200-day celebration of post-war social, cultural, and technological advances. At the time, Belgium still ruled Congo, a mineral-rich country whose territory far exceeded that of its colonizer. This was a source of great pride for Belgians. For its politicians, it was a chance to boast this achievement and celebrate the special bond with Belgian Congo. The zoo also featured Congolese villages where white men and women could gawk at the humans again behind these fences. A report told of people gossiping about seeing the Negroes at the zoological gardens. This marked the final chapter in the history of human zoos, yet its legacy remained just as disturbing and unsettling as its predecessors. One particularly striking image from this event predicts a small Congolese girl behind a fence. White families observe and interact with her. Although the nature of the interaction is unclear, it's unsettling to consider the possibility that the crowd may have been treating her as they would a caged animal in a zoo, perhaps even feeding her. The legacy of human zoos extends far beyond the confines of the fairgrounds. They perpetuated harmful stereotypes, justified colonial violence, and laid the groundwork for systemic racism that continues to plague societies today. As we confront this darker chapter in history, it's imperative to acknowledge the profound impact of these exhibits and work towards a future where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race or ethnicity. The village constructed in 1958 Brussels exhibit featured a significantly larger number of Congolese individuals on display, totaling almost 600. According to a journalist who attended the fair, spectators would watch as the Congolese went about their daily routines behind the fence. Despite 65 years passing since the previous exhibition, little seemed to have been learned from the past. Yet, acknowledging this darker chapter of history, we also find an opportunity for reflection and redemption. It is through understanding the atrocities of the past that we can commit ourselves to building a more just and equitable future. We must recognize that the scars of colonialism continue to reverberate through society, perpetuating systems of oppression and inequality. In doing so, we honor the memory of those who suffered inhumanity in the name of colonialism, and we pave the way for a future guided by empathy, understanding, and respect for all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background. Together, let's strive to build a world where the horrors of human zoos are relegated to the annals of history, and where every individual is afforded the dignity and respect they deserve.